Welcome back to another episode of Marvel Man 901. So in this episode I'm gonna talk about the Secret Wars. This is from 1984. So it all starts with basically a huge platform appears out of nowhere in a different galaxy, far, far away, where many superheroes such as Captain America, Captain Marvel, which is Monica Rambeau this time, the Wasp, Storm, Hulk, Cyclops, Mr. Fantastic, Professor X, Thor, Wolverine, Thing, Human Torch, Iron Man, this time being Jim Rhodes, this is before he is War Machine, Spider-Man, Rogue, Magneto for some reason, She-Hulk, Lockheed, Hawkeye, Colossus and Nightcrawler all appear out of nowhere and they are all completely confused. Another platform shows up and it features the supervillains known as Galactus, Doctor Doom, Dr. Octopus, Kang, Lizard, Absorbing Man, Molecule Man, Ultron, Enchantress and the Wrecking Crew featuring the Wrecker, Piledriver, Thunderball and Bulldozer. So all of these characters are of course very confused and become even more confused when all of a sudden a galaxy, they can basically, the only thing they actually can see except the platforms is a huge galaxy who's basically just being torn apart. So obviously very powerful stuff is happening, and out of the wreckage basically of this galaxy, bits and pieces from different planets are basically being fused into one big planet known as Battleworld. Right after these events, Ultron, who is basically out to kill anything that's living, goes ballistic and starts attacking the supervillains. Now he is actually bumped into Galactus, who then basically notices these small gnats more beside him, and he basically takes all the energy out of Ultron, basically effectively killing him. Now we hear a voice. A voice is speaking to them from basically everywhere, and it's basically saying, this voice actually is coming from Big Rift, and it's actually saying, I am from beyond. Slay your enemies and all your desires shall be yours. Nothing you dream of is impossible for me to accomplish. That being said, Galactus, who is obviously very powerful and basically has very little patience of such trivial things as killing small things, he basically just shoots off straight after this rift in space, right after the Beyonder, wanting what he always has wanted, that his humongous hunger actually to be removed. Dr. Doom is the only creature actually who is actually reacting to Galactus shooting off. He goes straight after Galactus, basically piggyback, basically straight behind Galactus, and hoping to basically get whatever fallout he can get from the fight between these two titans basically. However, both of them are being basically rejected or repulsed by the Beyonder and basically are shot down towards Battleworld. So both the heroes and the villains are landed, basically placed upon the planet at some distance naturally, and apparently these two are now supposed to fight, and whoever wins get whatever they want. At once, all the heroes except the X-Men actually go against Magneto. Magneto is technically a villain, he's a murderer, he's just evil basically, except now that he's basically a little bit different. During this time period he has started to become more of basically for mutants, except instead of basically against humans, and the X-Men have noticed this over the years, and now they basically think is that we are all in the same position, we need to fight alongside each other. It's a reason why he is along with us instead of with the villains. But the Avengers, Fantastic Four and all of them, they won't hear it and they go basically accusing Magneto. So eventually Magneto actually leaves to find his own place. After this, they basically need to find a leader and they decided to go for Captain America, him being perfect natural leader. Dr. Doom and Galactus, they basically had crashed onto the planet. Galactus is basically knocked out and Doom is somewhat reviving. Doom decides to basically find somewhere to rest or something like that, and he goes off, finds this compound or these buildings, highly technological stuff, which happen to house the villains. So he basically tells them basically take the fight against the Beyonder instead of the heroes. Don't follow the Beyonder's rules basically. But the villains wouldn't hear of it, they are basically all of them egotistical monsters so to speak, and they decided to basically boot Dr. Doom. He decided to leave to find his own place, so he takes a kind of a shuttle and shoots off. However, Kang he's not exactly trusting Doom to not go to the heroes, to go joining them instead, so he basically shoots Doom down hoping that it killed him. Naturally it didn't. Doom crashes down, he's injured, and the heroes actually ends up trying to help him, but Doom naturally fights the heroes and then basically shoves off. Now the villains arrived to attack the heroes. So in issue 2 now, It starts with Doom basically being back at the villain's compound, and he finds the inoperative Ultron. He basically tinkers around with him, eventually reawakens Ultron after he basically reprogrammed him into becoming his bodyguard. So Ultron basically is doing everything that Doom wants him to do. So the heroes fought the villains, and eventually the heroes actually won. The villains actually had to retreat, and some of the villains were actually captured. So the heroes found some kind of building, a new base basically for them, and so did Magneto actually, his own kind of base. The villains basically come back to their own compound where they find Doom, who basically takes leadership over them fairly easily. There's a slight notice that Galactus is basically standing on a hill completely still and just looking away. So now Magneto decides to infiltrate the hero compound, and he basically fights the heroes. As he's trying to basically get away from them, he pretty much kidnaps the Wasp and brings her to his base. In the end of this issue though, something actually happens to the Thing, something that will continue happening during this entire series actually, that he's basically being turned back to human and then back and forth. So he's back to human again. Very big surprise. So issue 3 now. Magneto tries to convince Wasp that he's not a bad person, that he's not the monster that she believes him to be. Meanwhile, this storm is kind of brewing, and this is a very dangerous, highly lethal storm actually. Basically, if you're out in this, you will die, unless you're like Thor or something. Meanwhile, in the hero compound, the X-Men had basically found a little bit of a place for themselves actually, and they were basically talking about joining Magneto, basically letting the mutants stay with the mutants. Spider-Man, however, was basically just swinging around checking out the place, accidentally overheard them, and he, naturally being a hothead as he is, he decides to fight them. He is actually fairly successful actually, and he's very close to notifying the other heroes of the X-Men's plans when Professor X actually basically manipulated Spider-Man's thoughts into making him forget what he had seen or heard, which he will later on regret greatly, as this is obviously a very big violation, something that Professor X has vowed never to do basically. So the X-Men leave, and now we're gonna go over to Doom over at the villain's compound. So he actually got 2 humans from this place in Denver, which apparently had been placed on Battleworld as well. So you got 2 women, which he actually augmented into becoming Titania and Volcana. So Titania and Volcana are basically introduced in this issue here. The 2 new villains join the other villains naturally, feeling that they owe it to Doom basically. Molecule Man and Volcana are basically forming a sort of relationship, actually falling in love with each other, which is kind of nice to see. Meanwhile, during this storm, Thor decides to basically release Enchantress from her captivity, and they basically teleported away to talk elsewhere basically and converse about the strangeness of it all. And I mean, both of them are immortal, extremely old, and they feel a little bit out of place in this kind of war. So the storm breaks, and the villains attacks the heroes straight away. Now the Hulk basically drops the ball on basically telling Captain America that the storm had broken, and the heroes are basically caught unawares. The villains rescue the captive villains, except naturally Enchantress, who is already out, and the heroes had to retreat. So the 4th issue begins with the heroes' base basically being demolished by Molecule Man, who basically wanted to flex his powers for his new somewhat girlfriend. And he decided to do even more than that by basically dropping a huge mountain on the retreating heroes. So Thor returns back to this basically place where the villains now happen to be, the demolished base of the heroes, and he fights the villains. Very vicious fight, and eventually he's actually defeated, but he basically, I mean, he looks like he's destroyed, however he basically just tricks them and escapes. Doom naturally knew that Kang had tried to kill him, so he kills Kang instead. Meanwhile, the X-Men came to Magneto's base basically, and the Wasp basically reveals that she never actually wanted to be his friend or whatever. She basically just wants to find out what he was up to, and then she basically escaped in a pod. So the heroes were actually alive under the mountain. Apparently the Hulk and Iron Man were basically keeping it up. The person actually who is technically saving the heroes is Mr. Fantastic, and his pretty awesome brain really, as he basically managed to use Iron Man's suit and 2 others basically to power it to blow a freaking hole in the mountain. And Thor basically trots along alive basically joins the heroes. So the heroes eventually found this kind of village for some very primitive alien species who would help them, get them food, shelter, and healing them. And again, the Thing basically reverses back to the Thing again. So issue 5 now begins with a huge event again, with Galactus basically bringing his ship, his huge ship, basically a world on its own basically. So he brings his ship to this planet, and naturally at once people begins thinking that what the hell is he doing now? What's he up to? And they are afraid that he might actually start to devour the planet, which is something that he does. So naturally, Professor X and Magneto joins forces, mental forces basically, to contact Galactus to find out, to basically maybe calm him down or something, while Mr. Fantastic, this village is basically just outside this hill. So Mr. Fantastic basically goes up to try to contact Galactus as well. Eventually Galactus notices and attacks the mutants and Mr. Fantastic. None of them are severely injured or anything like that, basically just swatting them away in a way. So now Galactus knows that there are basically small pests around, so he decides to dispatch a android. Now he has very dangerous, powerful androids, and this android is pretty powerful, so it fights the heroes, and eventually the heroes wins, and straight after the victory the heroes are attacked by the villains. So this is obviously a diversion that Doom set out so that Galactus basically would check out what's happening downside the hill, so that Doom could basically enter Galactus' ship. Meanwhile, the X-Men joins the fight against the supervillains, and eventually the villains retreat, but the X-Men does that as well. However, Colossus is actually severely injured, and they decide to leave him, as Professor X actually senses that by moving him they could eventually actually accidentally kill him. He naturally hoped that Captain America and the other heroes would help Colossus, which they did. So Colossus is injured, but he is basically getting help from the aliens in the village. Was basically crashing in the escape pod that she had, crashing into a certain swamp which the lizard basically inhabited. He basically saw it as his own swamp, and he starts to at first attack her, but then when she basically showed that she didn't harm him anyway, basically became a little bit of allies. Meanwhile, Doom was in Galactus' ship, and he actually found some kind of strange vibration or sound signal or something like that in one of the computers that Galactus had, and he eventually actually recreated Claw. Now Claw had actually previously in the Dazzler's series actually been killed by Dazzler. Dazzler basically converts sound into light, and Claw is basically sound solidified. So when those two fought, Dazzler basically killed him, absorbed him, and then she later on would use basically the Claw sound as a way, the energy in itself actually, to attack Galactus. That's why Claw was somehow kind of absorbed into the ship of Galactus. Doom eventually sent down the fairly insane Claw actually down to the villains in order to basically tell the villains what to do. Meanwhile, the heroes decided, well, they basically planned on fighting Galactus. But before this, the X-Men basically learned that some of the villains had shot out to some kind of volcanic area, and they decided to check out what they were doing, and eventually the X-Men fought the villains. So the X-Men won, the villains basically ran away, and Cyclops decided to actually follow through with the villain plan anyway, which was basically causing a lot of eruptions in the volcanoes, which would eventually distract Galactus, giving Doom more time. So the issue ends actually with, in the swamp, Wasp actually gets shot by some of the villains, pretty much dead, straight through her chest, and then basically getting picked up along with the lizard. So the next issue here, we actually are introduced to Spider-Woman, Julia Carpenter. At first it was a very big surprise for me, because I didn't actually get that she was from that Earth slide, basically, that ended up in the Battleworld. But apparently she was, and she decided to basically help out. This is, again, the first appearance of Spider-Woman, big thing. She basically joined the heroes. Meanwhile, Wasp was basically dumped by the villains that had basically shot her, and basically dumped at the heroes, and then she was left there. She was actually presumed dead. Very brutal thing actually, and one of her best friends, She-Hulk, decided to get revenge on the villains, so she basically ran off and attacked the villains. In the end of this issue, Galactus senses that some kind of anomaly was in his ship, so he basically caught the anomaly, which was Doom, and basically threw it out pretty roughly. So the next issue now, we can see Spider-Man in his black suit. How that happened? Well, here it is. So first of all, the heroes fought the villains to save She-Hulk. Now, She-Hulk was very badly injured by the villains, and eventually, though, the heroes defeated the villains. Basically drove them off and took their base instead. Apparently, Wasp had, basically survived. She was whole again. Some kind of miraculous appearance, actually. As to the whole Spider-Man situation, some of the heroes found some kind of machine that could basically recreate clothes, and obviously them all being in a fairly vicious fights, some of the clothes have been damaged. Spider-Man decided to try this machine out, but he didn't exactly know which machine it was, so he just basically tried one, and out came the symbiote. Of course, Spider-Man didn't know that this was a symbiote, that this was basically a parasite, which would have some very dire consequences for him later on, but he basically just thought, I got a new suit, and it's pretty awesome. So he was very stoked about that. So that is how the black suit came to be. That is basically where Venom in himself basically came from. So it's a pretty interesting thing that it was all basically just a coincidence. If he decided to go for a different machine, everything could have been very different. Oh yeah, so the next issue begins with the heroes fighting Galactus. Now obviously they're very afraid that he would basically devour this planet. I mean, they would all die, and it's obviously a bad thing. Anyway, meanwhile, Doom was basically dissecting Claw. He knew that Claw had been inside Galactus' ship, so a lot of its signals basically was still inside Claw, him being sound and all. So Doom was basically slicing him up and actually making lenses, which he would later on actually use to get the power that was Galactus. So the machine that Galactus usually use is basically just a machine that makes things easier for him to basically absorb a planet. However, when the heroes damaged it, he decided to basically do it the natural way, so to speak, for him. So he's inside his ship, and he is basically absorbing his ship first, which is basically a world. However, now Doom's machine basically kicks in, and Doom himself actually gets the power that was supposed to be Galactus' power. So Doom is now extremely powerful. So in this issue, it actually begins with him being extremely powerful, and he decides to go after the Beyonder. Doom versus the Beyonder, right? This is a huge fight, a lot of energy just blazing back and forth, and it actually looks like Doom is failing here. He looks basically as defeated, but he actually probably, from my own deduction actually, I believe he uses the power that he basically got from Galactus to actually absorb the Beyonder, absorbing the very essence of Beyonder into himself. So he actually is basically as powerful as Galactus and the Beyonder. He's basically the most powerful being in the entire universe. So in this next issue, it begins basically with Doom talking to the heroes. Just talking to them, basically saying that it's all over, I have done the impossible, I have defeated the Beyonder and Galactus, and I am now the most powerful being in the universe. I don't wish to fight, I want things to go peacefully, everything is finished, basically. The villains basically stand a bit far away, they see that he speaks to the heroes and believes that Doom is basically betraying them. So Molecule Man is upset, he's pissed off. So he decides to go off to basically confront Doom, and he basically attacks Doom. But Doom, instead of basically retaliating and destroying the Molecule Man, he decides to basically take away a certain mental block that Molecule Man had. So Molecule Man had basically only being able to control or change inorganic material. For some reason he couldn't actually do this on organic stuff, which has been some ways to actually defeat him. Doom actually took away this mental block, and now Molecule Man can do exactly anything, which obviously Molecule Man was kind of happy about. So he actually decides to take the villains along with this piece of Denver that actually had ended up in Battleworld. Take this, fly off through space, and take them home. So that's pretty much anticlimactic ending there. A little side note here, the heroes ended up in their own compound again, and apparently during the night some kind of static electricity light thing kind of possessed the Hulk. There's no explanation or anything at all in this at first here, I will explain it later on, but at first he is possessed, and then later on the possession kind of passes over to Spider-Woman, and then it basically just ends. The day comes, and Doom basically summons the heroes over to the newly created Tower of Doom so that they can basically talk and basically end the whole affair. So they talk, very civil, and basically Doom says that I'm not the Doom that you once fought, I'm not a monster anymore, I'm sorry for every evil I've done and all that. I basically just want everything to be good now. So he actually brought Kang back from the dead, and then brought him back to his future, or whatever, his timeline basically. And while this happens, the possession from Spider-Woman is basically passed over to Claw, and eventually though, Doom basically tells the heroes that, well, you're free to go whenever you want, basically, let me know and I will send you back to Earth. Eventually though, later on, the heroes all decides after some voting that they all need to fight Doom, because this isn't right. Doom can't be the most powerful being in the universe. Things will go wrong here. So the last issue now, issue 12, it basically begins where the previous issue ended, that the heroes basically are obliterated, explodes, all dead by Doom, as he naturally knows everything and he knows they would to fight him. Maybe he destroyed them because he was afraid, maybe not, who knows. Meanwhile, over at the remaining villains, who are basically passing through space at the time, Enchantress, being in the bathroom, basically contacts an elemental who apparently knew a lot of stuff, and Enchantress basically learned about the Beyonder. Basically that the Beyonder was from a beyond realm, basically a dimension next to this dimension. And apparently he was everything inside it. He was basically all that was, and he was very bored. So apparently when the Molecule Man was created, I believe that is at least the event, when he was created, it was very cataclysmic, very big deal. This event actually caused a tiny little pinhole between these two dimensions to open up, through which the Beyonder could actually see everything on Earth, what was going on, and he was very curious about this. He had never actually seen anything like this. He had never seen Desire the way that he saw it here, and he was very perplexed and he wanted to learn more, basically. He was very curious. So the Enchantress learns that the Beyonder is actually hiding close to Doom. He's not actually dead, and for some reason Enchantress decides to basically use Volcana to get back to Battleworld, to basically prevent what is going on or something in the likes of that. And eventually she and Lizard actually ended up getting teleported over to Battleworld. So meanwhile, Claw, who is now basically being possessed, as you might remember from the previous issue, he was basically telling Doom, basically like, aren't you afraid that the heroes might come back? Are you sure they're dead? I mean, this is how it could have happened, I can show you. And Doom naturally is being a little bit bored by, yeah, okay, fine, show me. So Claw basically shows through his sound sculptures or whatever, how the heroes are basically being revived again by this alien woman who basically had this healing touch, which they and the heroes have been using during this entire time. How they basically could all get back again and attack him. And the thing about Doom right now is that he's so extremely powerful that he can't control what he actually does. He can't control the reality that he actually changes. And by just learning that could be a possibility actually makes it happen. Claw, in a way, basically saved the heroes. Well, I guess technically it would be the Beyonder who's doing this. Anyway, the heroes actually are alive again and they fight. They attack and they fight the Claw right outside this Tower of Doom, and Captain America naturally managed to get past Claw and into Doom's chamber basically and attacks Doom. So Doom basically kills Captain America several times over and over and over, and it's very perplexed. How can Captain America keep coming back? How is this happening? And then naturally it is revealed the Beyonder was actually inside of Doom all the time and is actually fighting Doom from the inside. So this is huge cataclysmic fight yet again between Doom, extremely powerful, and the Beyonder, also extremely powerful, and this time the Beyonder actually wins. He wins and it basically takes Doom and Claw and just disappears. So the heroes are basically left standing there on Battleworld having no idea what the hell is going on at all. And some very strange things actually start to happen. Just by wishing things would actually happen. I mean, Mr. Fantastic wished that he could find a way to actually be able to transport all the heroes back, and it actually happened. He managed to find something very quickly. Captain America wished that his shield would be whole. It was whole. So apparently this was all some kind of fallout from this extremely powerful power that the Beyonder and Dr. Doom apparently had, basically changed reality. All the heroes basically are teleported back by Mr. Fantastic, except the Thing actually, because he decided to remain as he felt like he could actually find himself here on this planet. He needed to basically reflect upon who he actually was, as he could basically turn back to Benjamin Grimm and then back to the Thing again, choosing for once. He has always been a character who has been basically trapped in his own persona, basically been trapped as a monster, kind of the same thing as the Hulk in a way. Anyway, he decided to basically remain, and She-Hulk would then take his place on Fantastic Four. So a little side note actually, Mr. Fantastic apparently has a pretty sound theory actually about this whole thing with the Thing. Actually, that apparently he believes anyway, that the Thing probably always actually had the power to, well, the ability to basically change back and forth. But he had such a low self-esteem, among other things, that he basically just couldn't believe it. And that's why basically it never happened. Which actually is somewhat revealed later on, not in this series naturally, as this is the end of this series, but in Fantastic Four in itself, or possibly the Thing, as he had his own show at the time. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed. Why I decided to do Secret Wars is, well, some of my followers probably know this on Instagram, as I basically talk to them about either basically talking about this one or Kraven's Last Hunt. And eventually, after counting some of the somewhat votes, I guess you can say, in the comment section, I came up with the idea that this is the one to do. So the next one I will probably do is Kraven's Last Hunt. Not really sure when I'm gonna do it, but this will probably be the next one I will do. So I hope you have enjoyed all this. I hope you would do subscribe, share, like, all of those stuff. Naturally, all of this is Marvel's creations. I'm telling stories. And I just hope that you all have a good day and stay safe out there.